I'm looking at the chat and it looks like we have people from all over, but a lot of people having sunshine, and I'm in Chicago right now and sunshine here too. Happy for that. It's 2 o'clock, so I think we're going to begin. We have a very full presentation for you today. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar on preparing for program challenges at your public library, presented by Sukrit, Goswami, and Amanda Vazquez. My name is Brian Russell, and I'm a project director in the Public Programs Office at the American Library Association. Today's webinar is presented by the ALA Public Programs Office with support from ALA's Cultural Communities Fund. You can find out more about the Cultural Communities Fund at ala.org/CCF. And you can also find more learning sessions, program ideas, and grant announcements on our blog, programminglibrarian.org. Before we jump into the presentation, I would like to cover a few housekeeping notes about our Zoom classroom. You'll notice that only our presenters have mic and video access. However, you can toggle your audio settings in the bottom left corner of the Zoom toolbar. In the meeting controls toolbar, you can also turn on closed captions by clicking the show captions icon. You may need to tap the more icon first to see the captions option, depending on the device you're using to access Zoom. Chat will be active, so those using screen readers might want to turn off custom announcements. We imagine that chat will be very busy with comments and discussion about today's topic, so if you have any questions for the presenters that you would like to be answered at the end of their presentation, please use the Q&A function. As well, if you experience any tech issues, please use that Q&A function to let us know, and ALA staff will assist you. Without further ado, I would like to introduce today's presenters. Sukrit Goswami is the director of the Haverford Township Free Library in Haverford, Pennsylvania. For 3 years, Sukrit was on the leadership team at the Pennsylvania Library Association as the chair of the Intellectual Freedom Committee, where he worked to improve IFC presence among the membership in the libraries across the state. Sukrit has been active in the American Library Association, currently as a committee member on the Intellectual Freedom Committee and chair of the Information Technology Policy Committee. Sukrit is also serving on the Freedom to Read Foundation Board, where he is a member of the Executive Committee. Amanda Vazquez is the Library Director at the Dubuque County Library District in Dubuque, Iowa, with over a decade of experience working in all areas of public libraries. She has firsthand experience with intellectual freedom challenges and now offers direct support to library workers experiencing challenges as chair of the Iowa Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee. She is also a member of ILA's Executive Board, ALA Chapter Counselor for Iowa, and Chair-elect for ALA's Intellectual Freedom Roundtable. The slides you'll see today are packed with information. They were emailed to you and will also be available online with the recording, so you can access all of the links in the toolkit Sukrit and Amanda have prepared. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you, Brian, for the introductions, and thank you to ALA staff for entrusting us with today's session. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Today, Amanda and I will cover challenge landscape in library programming world, the challenge trends, the challenge process, and how it differs from material challenges. We will share some recommendations on policy and procedure challenges, and we will also provide a sample toolkit, which will prepare you and your colleagues for any potential program challenges you might face. These days, books are not the sole target of attacks, as we all know. Both schools and public librarians and libraries are increasingly in the crossroads of conservative groups during their LGBTQIA+ and critical race theory events, displays, and even talks. Even though majority of challenges the libraries are facing are for books, but from the ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom records, about 18% of reported challenges are for displays, exhibitions, programs, meeting room use, films, databases, etc. Please note that these figures are assumed to be highly underreported, just like with material challenges. But as you can see from the graphics over here and the table alongside, there were hardly any challenges for anything other than books prior to 2017. But a new trend started in 2017, which slowed down in 2020 during COVID pandemic restrictions, but now it's again beginning to creep up to 2019 levels. In 2022, Office of Intellectual Freedom tracked 42 challenges to public library programs. Next slide, please. 18 of them for drag queen story times. There were 16 additional LGBTQIA+ programs that were challenged. Most of these challenges go unreported. So please report any and all challenges to ALA, Office of Intellectual Freedom, and also to your state library association. Now, you must have wondered why all of a sudden these challenges. So people have some sincerely held religious belief. They have misunderstanding of critical race theory. They also misunderstand the truth or disagree with what is truth. They have concerns over accurate representation. For example, where's the straight pride? And then some people, sometimes well-wishers, have concern about safety of attendees. And we all know sometimes libraries have canceled their events because of the safety issue. Some are reacting to current political or social events. And then there are these individuals who like to protect others, frequently children, from difficult ideas and information. It is hard to argue with someone who believes that they are right and have a moral responsibility to change things to meet their worldview. So now what is being challenged? So we know LGBTQIA events, drag queen story time, book clubs. So I have personal experience with the drag queen story time event, which our library hosted in 2019. Now, we also hosted this event in 2017 and 2018 without any issue. But in 2019, almost 100 protesters showed up front of the library on the day of program. Some groups started a nationwide petition against our libraries hosting drag queen story time. People showed up at the township's commissioners meeting. People showed up at the library's board meeting. We received hundreds of phone calls and emails. Now I can brag about how successful our event was. Over 500 people attended. We had to add another second story time, but this is not, today is not the day for me to brag about those. But what we did, we contacted ALA, Office of Intellectual Freedom, for their guidance and follow their advice. We had one spokesperson for all communication regarding this matter with media, patrons, community members, and local leaders. Our frontline staff's response was, please use the suggestion box for your complaint or contact so-and-so on this email. So we had library@Hartford Township Free Library email for them. Now, last year, we also held a teen book club last year, we also had a teen book club challenge. Because our teen book club decided to read the book Genderqueer. We had 3 community members who called and emailed and protested that we cancel this book club event. One of them who did not have any kids, but she was concerned about others' kids, and even mentioned to me that not all parents know what is right for their kids and what is wrong for their kids. The other one claimed to not even have read the book, but is objecting to our teen book club choice. Now, our response was, just like we do not influence our 7 other book clubs with their reading choices, we do not influence our teenagers either. We cited our policy, which is also on our website, and I'm not going to read the entire policy for you, but I will read just one sentence from that policy. And that is, although librarians may offer guidance, parents or legal guardians are responsible for the selection, monitoring, the reading, listening, and viewing of their children. So I think this one statement really suffices that, we are not making anybody read anything. We are just providing information. If people want to read something, our job as librarians, as a library, to provide them with information. But we can't be their parent. We can't be anyone's guardian. So I believe now the next 2 topics Amanda is going to talk about.
That's correct. Next slide, please. So I wanted us to take a moment at the beginning of our webinar today and to just kind of ground ourselves in some important ideas for our field. And I apologize, I'm a little bit sick today. So if you see me, I have a water bottle and I might be a little, anyway, you all know how it goes. So like I said, I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about some of our professional ethics. And this is an excerpt of the American Library Association's professional ethics statements. And I only have a few of them here that I said that I thought were most relevant to the conversation that we're having today. So they are reflective of the fact that we are an organization or a profession that provides equitable services, equitable access, that we resist censorship of library resources, all efforts of library resources. And I think that challenges to materials, book challenges get a lot of attention, and they are the majority of the challenges that we do face and that we do see. But there are challenges to all different kinds of materials and other resources as well. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here today. Also, I think we always need to remember that we need to distinguish our personal convictions and our professional duties, and think about how that impacts the conversations that we have with our staff members and our coworkers and our colleagues, those that we have when we're out in our community or with our board members. Next, we're going to do a quick review of what a challenge traditionally looks like in terms of materials, and then we can talk more about program challenges specifically. So generally, your process for a library material challenge or a challenge of any type should be laid out in a policy that's approved by your library board of trustees or other similar group. This is a very common process. This is what I've seen, but I've seen a lot of variations on this as well. This is how I would probably design my ideal situation for this process, but each library's process is going to change based on the size of your staff, whether you have a lot of selectors on your staff or program staff members, and how active and involved your board is along the way. So initially, a patron is going to raise a concern to your staff member, potentially, probably someone at your front desk. At that point, ideally, they are referred to a manager or the library director. So if in the case of maybe a manager, a good person for this would be the manager of the department under which the resource exists. So, a manager of the selections and acquisitions might be the one that is discussing this. If it's a material, or if you have a programming department, or a youth services department, that kind of manager who has supervisory responsibility for that area. So that patron should be able to have a conversation. Hopefully, your staff, your director are able to explain your policy, how this resource came to be a part of your library's offerings, and that patron is satisfied. So that would be the point at which I would say this does not rise to an official challenge. At that point, you have a complaint. If that person is unsatisfied, at that point, I would provide them with a request for reconsideration form. At the point at which that is submitted, to me, that then becomes a challenge. So the patron can fill out the request for reconsideration form, return it to the library staff, and then you continue with the rest of your process. I would also note that you should, at this point, report this challenge to the Office of Intellectual Freedom of the American Library Association and your state's Intellectual Freedom Committee if they collect these statistics or if they provide direct support to librarians dealing with challenges. And I think less than half of states do provide that. I believe 60% of states refer all of their libraries' challenges directly to OIF for assistance. Anyway, at the point when a challenge is received, I think that ideally the issue then is presented to a committee. So the committee maybe is formed by your library trustees. Maybe it is already laid out in your policy, ideally. They would read and review the challenge item or the plan for the program. They would review the applicable policies. And then based on a conversation, they would make a recommendation to the director or the board. And this also would take into consideration the argument that your concerned citizen has included in their request for reconsideration. Once the committee has made a recommendation to the director or to the board, then the director or the board can make accept that recommendation and take that action, or hopefully, in my experience, not ignore it and go off and do whatever they want. But if the next step is for it to go to a director and then the patron is unhappy with the director's decision as communicated to them, then they can appeal that to the library board. So that is a variation on the challenge process. Like I said, yours might look a little bit differently, but this is maybe how I would ideally lay it out. And one more comment about the committee. One thing that I really like about how we structured our reconsideration policy is that the committee includes a couple different types of involved people. And we say that it should also include 2 people who have responsibilities in that resources area. So generally it'll be acquisitions. So, 2 people who have experience with acquisitions. What our policy does not say, and this is very intentional, is that those people need to be employed at this library. I have been very fortunate in my time to have other library directors, generally of academic libraries, on my library board. And we have a really great regional network here where we librarians of different types get together regularly and undertake projects together. So we have really great relationships with the other libraries in our area. And so were I to have a challenge presented at my library, I probably would not draw more of my staff into this process. It just gets very personal. I would instead look to other members of my community and my library network around me to serve on that reconsideration committee instead of my staff members. So ideally, you'll be following your policy. Next slide, please. Because deviations from your policy can lead to legal liabilities for you and your organization. So when you say that you are going to do something and then you do something different and you have, functionally a contract, a policy that this is the way we're going to do things, it's never a good idea to deviate from that. I would also make the recommendation that this is kind of the first big recommendation of the webinar. I would recommend that you separate your request for reconsideration or statement of concern policy from your collection development policy. We're here today because challenges happen to a lot of different types of library resources. They're not always items that are in our collection. So I think that you should be rewriting your request for reconsideration or statement of concern policy in a way that is more broad and all-encompassing of those things that could be challenged, whether it is an item in your collection, a program that you're offering, a display, the use of your community meeting space, or anything else that you might have in your library's offerings. I would also recommend adding in that extra step of having a staff member talk to the patron before making the request for reconsideration form available to them. I would say that just like with materials and just like material challenges, when you have a program challenge, you should try your best to follow your standard reconsideration policy. So that would include everything that I mentioned earlier. But also, if your policy for materials says we're going to leave it on the shelf, you should try to continue to hold and schedule your programs as they were originally scheduled, or as you would were there no concern, to prevent any self-censorship. Now, of course, there are times where this kind of goes out the window. In my personal experience with challenges, I had standard challenges that followed the procedures, and then I also had a gentleman come and check out a bunch of books, go on Facebook Live and burn them in a burn barrel. That was a little bit different, and so sometimes needs must, and you have to kind of do your best in the situation that your community has provided to you. If we could go to the next slide, that would be great. So these are some of the ways that we anticipate that program challenges will look different than materials challenges. One, they're going to be time sensitive in a way that a material challenge is not, because this program is scheduled to happen at this date, at this time. And that is probably fast approaching by the time that you have started advertising it, patrons have noticed and made a decision to come and talk to you about it. So should you decide to kind of, like hustle through your standard procedure, you might need to call a special board meeting if you feel that that is relevant, if you can go through the steps in your process, or if you, want to make sure that your board has an opportunity to meet and discuss and kind of hopefully put their stamp of approval on it. You can call a special board meeting. I know in a lot of states you only require 24 hours notice. So that is something that you might be able to do. Another couple of things that I think really make this feel a lot different than a materials challenge is that it can really have impacts on the physical safety of staff, attendees, and performers. In the very first meeting that we had discussing what we were going to talk about at this webinar, the Downers Grove, Illinois Library program was mentioned, where they had a, I believe it was a drag queen story time planned, and someone mailed a bullet to their local police station. Hopefully that is like the far, far, far end of the spectrum of like the worst things that can present itself to you in a challenge or in a programming situation. And most of the time it is going to be people who are saying, hey, I don't think you should be doing this. I really disagree with this. And it won't be nearly as dramatic. But when you have, teens, members of marginalized groups who are attending your library programs and they maybe feel unsafe, that is very different than coming to the library and just check out a book that someone disagrees with. Also, I feel it can be a lot more personal to staff and organizers because their names are often published alongside the event. So, come join Miss Amanda for story time, or, Miss Amanda is going to be coordinating this Nerf battle thing. So your community members can tie the name and organizer of these events to someone actively working at your library in a way that maybe they couldn't to a book that might have been acquired 15 years ago by a library staff member who hasn't worked there in 12. So these are things that I hope that you keep in mind while you're thinking about what your challenge process looks like and how you are advertising your events, how you are just interacting with your staff, your attendees, and your community. And I'll hand it back over to Sukrit for the next slide.
Just one slide. So what to do? Be prepared with robust policies and procedures. Have a unified message. Try to have one spokesperson to handle these kind of challenges, especially program challenges. Invest in staff trainings, invest in trustee trainings, build relationship with local leaders, and also have a streamlined community messaging. Train trustees now so that your balance and knowledge base is insulated from new members who may come with either anti-intellectual freedom priorities, because that can happen, or who might be ignorant about the challenges and the challenge process already set in place by the library. So a well-educated board can shut down those conversations without having to take any sides. I'll talk about these individually later in this session. So I'm going to hand this back over to Amanda.
Thanks. So here we've listed just a few resources that we think might be valuable to you as you are putting together any of your policies, having just discussions with your staff members. The American Library Association website has a really useful, to me at least, page. It lists notable First Amendment court cases. There are also two specific interpretations of the Library Bill of Rights that I think are relevant. With both of these, and actually even the final one that's kind of, I guess it's a statement sort of, not censorship by selection. If you haven't read that, that's a really great way of looking at how selection is an inherently positive act, a positive and additive act, whereas censorship is a negative and controlling act. So anyway, all three of those kind of top tier things would be really great resources, things for you to look through if you have not yet. I should note that a lot of these things are going to be either explicitly or implicitly about materials. And so, especially the First Amendment court cases, I think that it's helpful to reframe everything as a library resource. So a program is a resource, a display is a resource, a service that you provide is a resource, materials are resources, and to try and make, to take things that might be written specifically about one of those things and transfer that, that idea, that concept onto something like programming. And as always, your programming should be content neutral, and you should be making policy decisions that are content neutral. Next slide, please. So one of our biggest recommendations, in addition to having your selection and reconsideration policy separate from your collection development policy, and this goes hand in hand with that, is to create or revise, if you already have one, great job, a programs policy. So a programming policy should be like a collection development policy for your programs. So it should talk about how library programs are selected, who you're going to partner with. Just like we say, how we're going to, select materials, maybe which types of vendors or resources we're going to consult. You should include a statement of intellectual freedom or adopt those statements as just part of your standing board policy. Our program policy here at Dubuque County also discusses costs to attend, and the fact that we will not charge unless you have a take-home, there's a take-home element, and it will be waived if you ask. And again, referencing that you should have a separate reconsideration policy that is more all-encompassing. And here I have a little excerpt of the Ames Iowa Public Library's programming policy. One thing that I really appreciated, it's very common sense, I think, for us as librarians. We are not obligated to represent multiple or opposing viewpoints within any one program or series. So if you have a particular speaker coming in that people disagree with, and they're like, well, you should have someone else on the panel who represents this idea, you don't have to do that. Just because people are unhappy, you have an opportunity to, based on community interest, provide another program that maybe better suits their interests and needs. Next slide, please. Here we have a few handy program policies linked for you. As you will see, is at the top of the screen. The Ames Public Library is here as well. And then we have 2 other policies for you to click through and use as potential inspiration. I hope that you have libraries that you go to as your reference for when you're revising policy. We revise one policy every month here at Dubuque County. And we kind of started really big, and we were looking at like 25 libraries policies for the first few months. And then we found the libraries after a few months that really kind of matched our style and our appetite for how wordy to be, how prescriptive we were going to be. And so those are, now we're only looking at probably a half dozen policies a month as reference. And Ames is one of the ones that we look at here in Iowa, or in Dubuque County a lot. Anyway, next slide, please.
Amanda, can I just jump in for a second? So different organizations and boards will have different appetite for how detailed and prescriptive or broad the policy should be. So we recommend reviewing policies of your neighboring libraries and also the big city libraries in your state. And if you do have a good program policy, please share. As you can see, we did find these 4 which we like and which are applicable to most of our scenarios, but we really want you to just make sure to consider like your local community, local board, and what their perspective is. Thank you. Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for catching what I forgot to say. So the next thing I want to touch on briefly is switching the conversation. So we have historically had a request for reconsideration policy. And we've recently changed it to a statement of concern policy. And this might be a distinction without a difference in some places, but I really do feel like it reframes the conversation that you have with your patron, when instead of saying, this patron is handing in a form that's requesting that we get rid of this item, it is, I am a community member who is concerned about something going on in this community resource of mine in this public library. And I would like to state that concern to you so we can engage in a conversation about how to address my concerns. It just, like I said, it might be a distinction without a difference. But I feel like it is less of a, I'm asking you to remove books and more of a, I'm an engaged community member. And I think that reframing it can be good for your patron side of things. It can also be a good way of framing your conversation with your community member. Because as we said at the beginning of the conversation, or at the beginning of this webinar, you know, the people who are approaching us with material challenges or statements of concern, they are members of our community generally. They are people who hopefully I hope to continue to have a good relationship with. And you know, we are here to serve our entire community, of course, and the diversity of their ideas, and to provide for them. And so I think that making sure that we are entering into these conversations with a respectful and, you know, curious and inquisitive mindset can be really helpful. I also think that, you know, this may be a little overdone, you know, when they go low, we go high. You know, if they are being, you know, emotional or whatever, like respect the fact that those are, you know, strong personal emotions for them. Yeah, so that's all I'm going to say about reframing the conversation. But I also think that you should be changing your form. So like I said, taking your request for consideration out of your collection development, making it more all-encompassing. This is a screen grab from the Office of Intellectual Freedom's report form. So when you go to report a challenge to them, these are all the things that they have, you know, listed as a checkbox, including the other at the bottom, in case there's something really wild and crazy and unique that comes across your desk. I hope that there's not, honestly. But there are a lot of different things that you can report and you can request assistance for, or like just report for informational purposes to OIF. And I think that your forms in your library should also allow for a lot of different eventualities. So mine has a very similar little checkbox area where it's like, are you challenging a book or a DVD or a program or a magazine or a digital resource? While we hope that those challenges don't come, I think that it is valuable for us to be prepared for that and look like we're prepared, and that we have thought through these things instead of saying, oh, well, shoot, yeah, I guess you can cross that out and write it out. And I know the questions aren't phrased exactly in an applicable way. You know, it makes us look better. It makes us look more prepared. And it's easier for everyone involved when you've gone through these eventualities, excuse me, and are prepared with a form that would accept all of these potential challenges. Next slide, please. Here are some ways that we think that you might be able to attempt to restrict challenges in your service area, or in your library, I'm sorry. One would be placing restrictions on who is allowed to challenge in your library. You can restrict your challenges. I would say the residents of your service area is a good way to go about doing that, because everyone pays, presumably, property taxes that go to fund your library, or however your library is funded. So they are all stakeholders in this community resource in your municipal, county, district library. So even if they are not library card holders, they might be members of your district. And I say library card holders as a second additional option, thinking not just as people in your community who have library card holders, but like thinking outside of your community, people who maybe have purchased a full service card or are able to access through other agreements and arrangements that you have. So, you know, someone who maybe doesn't live in my service area, but they work closer to me, and so they have a library card here. You know, they are engaged with our community and engaged with our library. But what I would try to restrict with these is the, you know, somebody from out of state who's never stepped foot in your library, who's just going and filling out forms on people's websites trying to challenge materials. You can also try to limit less based on the people placing the challenge, but more on the item. So some libraries have been successful at adding into their policies that and schools have done this as well, placing a time limit on a repeat challenge of a material. So our board, had a challenge to Title X. We're not going to allow you to just re-challenge that material next month. Like, we're going to say it's good for a year. We'll reconsider it again after a year, but we can't allow our library business to be overrun by challenges. I think logically another way to do this, and these can maybe go hand in hand, is to limit a second challenge to a material after there's been a revision of the applicable policy. So if you have a library material or a library program and you have applicable policies and your board says, yeah, that totally is okay, it fits under our policies, and then somebody comes and, even a year later and says, hey, I want to challenge this again. It's like, well, we haven't changed the policy, so we're going to stand by our original decision and not go through this whole rigmarole again. I would say that if someone comes with, a fairly novel or different argument about why they think that this does not fit, why it should be reconsidered, I think it's better to err on the side of going through the challenge process. But, like I said, respecting the community members and their concerns for our libraries. I think you might also, depending on the way your reconsideration policy is written, sometimes you have a time limit saying, like, we'll respond at the next board meeting or within 60 days or whatever. I would try not to restrict yourself and put those kinds of requirements on yourself. I think that you can group or lump very similar or identical arguments together into a single reconsideration. Like, if someone comes in and they've just photocopied it and had 10 people put their signatures on it, those are not 10 individual challenges. And I think that you can take all of them through the process together. But depending on the way your policy is written, your board might need to take official action to make that an acceptable way to handle it. I think that's all for this slide. And now I'm going to hand it back to Sukrit.
Thanks, Amanda. So staff training is very important when it comes to handling challenges properly. I would advise everyone to create a mechanism to have annual training on intellectual freedom matters, because this is going to be one of the issues we will all be fighting for many, many years. What we have started doing actually in 2020, and we have monthly staff meetings, and we are spending 10 to 15 minutes on one topic in training staff, be it a customer service or training on our new databases. So we can add that, and we can add something about intellectual freedom in one of our staff meetings or a couple of our staff meetings, so our staff is aware. And during these meetings, play out challenges and complaint scenarios during the staff meeting. Prepare procedures for frontline staff, including the role of the spokesperson. Recommend reading of Intellectual Freedom Manual by Office of Intellectual Freedom staff to your staff. Now, during our research, we also found a great presentation from another library association regarding staff training. And that's what those numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 you are seeing there, like slide decks. This is beautiful, wonderful slides, and it will help you all tremendously. And this information is also in the toolkit, so you don't have to really go over on this slide, but all this information we put in together for you guys. Now, during any unintentional or guerrilla censoring by staff, I would say educate them. Go over library's philosophy, who we are, what we do, what our role is. Some of our staff can be like, why this book is going out or why you have this kind of book. But then again, our philosophy, our job is to provide information. So make sure we have like that in our library manual, in our library procedure, so we can have these kind of conversations with our staff. So, and now about the trustee training, like training of trustees on intellectual freedom and challenges is also very important. There are some very good resources to train trustee. My favorite one is United for Libraries. So we have membership for United for Libraries, of course, for which have a lot of information on how to do fundraising and how to assist library staff, but they also have some information about challenges and about intellectual freedom. There are state webinars. In our state, Pennsylvania, we have district consultants who can do trainings for our trustees. Now, training the trustee on how to navigate a meeting when the public shows up during a board meeting, very important. Let them know that they can put a limit on total public input time. In our case, we have 3 minutes. Limit on individual speaking time. And also, even though we have this 3 minutes limit, you can change that. If you see 100 people in a room, you can limit that from 3 minutes to 1 minute. You can also require a sign-in sheet for name and address. You can limit or prioritize those who live in your service area. You can say, do you have a library card? If they don't have a library card, you can say, well, then you can't speak. Only the board president speaks, and that's just to say thank you, or your time is up. No need to acknowledge that great comment or all that. So these are the part of trustee training which we need to do that. Now, issues to watch for: trustees who do not understand or disagree with policy and professional ethics, trustees who misunderstand or overstep their role. So basically, role of staff versus role of trustees, and many libraries face that. And actually, smaller the library is, more of this an issue for them. Again, there are resources. Some of them are in the toolkit, but also on ALA website. Again, United for Libraries is a really good resource to start training your trustees. Now, the communication with our government officials and the community is also very important. Build relationships with your local leaders. Invite your local government officials, in our case, our commissioners, to your events. Have lunch, coffee with them. Let them know what your library means to their constituents and to the community. Be proactive in sharing libraries' inclusive services model. Advertise programs of all type on social media, because we don't want to hear that, oh, you are celebrating Pride Month, but then they forget about all of our other amazing programs we do for other holidays or for other specific groups. Amanda.
All right, so on to the toolkit. So this is something that we put together as kind of a document, a binder, a SharePoint, OneNote, something or other, where you can have all kinds of things that are related to challenges in one handy dandy place. So as you can see, linked up at the very top right, it says PDF. There's a PDF version of this. It was probably shared with you. I'm sorry, where it has this kind of blank template, and then it has a version as if I were creating it for myself here at Dubuque County Library. So we want to have some ready reference of our First and Fourth Amendment and other applicable federal laws. If you have any state laws that you find are relevant, and this is something that your state law librarian can really help you with, is find those laws, read them, understand them, read the interpretations, read the the opinions of your attorney general if they exist, and have them collected here for quick reference. We also have next a few 4 or 5 linked articles and toolkits that have been created by ALA, and those are all publicly and freely available. These are really great things for you to go over with your staff, to excerpt and provide to your trustees, and just to help everyone who's involved understand more how selection and reconsideration works in libraries, how to respond, especially the how to respond to challenges and concerns. Those have some really good messaging ideas in them as well. As Sukrit held up his copy of the Intellectual Freedom Manual, mine's here somewhere, but pages 108 through 110 do have information about library programs specifically. There are a few ALA resources, the Code of Ethics that we already talked about, and those interpretations of the Library Bill of Rights, the Freedom to Read and Freedom to View statement. Those are just handy to have. You can send them off to whoever is interested or attach them to a response that you're crafting. But having them just freely available keeps you from fumbling through all of your other stuff. As you're looking at your policies in general, like I mentioned before, having other example policies that you reference can be really helpful as you are developing your own policies. But I think that it can also be an exceptional tool when you are communicating with your community members, when you are communicating with a city council member who maybe you don't know where they stand on things. When someone is like, why is your policy like this? You know, in my past library experience, the problem with the library was that, like, it was an Amanda problem, is kind of how it felt from my perspective. People thought that I was too young, I was too liberal, I, you know, didn't really understand how things worked. But having example policies from other libraries in your state, other reputable libraries in your region and the nation, and showing, no, our policy falls in line with all of these other libraries, especially in small libraries. I think that this is really helpful, because you can say these libraries probably have an attorney on retainer who looked at these policies and vetted them, and that's why I find them to be trustworthy and as good resources, and why I have modeled our policies after theirs. It indicates that you're not off on your own, doing your own thing, and just kind of doing whatever you want, that really there is this, you know, this professional consensus. Oh, shoot. This professional consensus. Sorry, folks. There's a professional consensus on how these policies work, on what best practices are, on what our legal and professional responsibilities are. And we are, you know, we're all doing this the same way. It's not something that's just happening here at my library. You should collect some staff training resources, trustee training resources. I always find that it's easier to have a collection of those in a little pile that I can dole out, as opposed to, oh shoot, board meeting is next week, what am I going to send them this month? And if you know that it's been a few months since you've done intellectual freedom type of things, you know, you can just come back to your toolkit. Or when a new board member starts, or when you have an issue that is coming up, or you can see it on the horizon and you want to prime your board, these are all great things to have collected in advance and available for you. It would also be great for you to have your challenge reporting forms, just so that you don't forget to do it. As we've said a couple times, challenges are wildly underreported. We estimate that something like only like 20 or 30% of challenges are actually reported to OIF. So every report helps. Also, there are so many people in your community who, in your library community, who are here to help you. So if your state library has consultants or other staff members who are available to assist, your state law librarian is happy to pull up information for you. You're a state and a regional association. I'm chair of the Intellectual Freedom Committee for Iowa. I am happy to answer questions, be a shoulder to cry on, do research, track down someone who knows what they're talking about more than I do, and make those phone calls for you. Also, get to know your city and county attorney. Have them look at your library policies, ask them questions, and make sure that they have a working understanding of how libraries work. I would also argue that it's really important for you to have outside legal counsel. Your city and county attorney is a city or county attorney, and they do not spend the vast majority of their career working on library specific or First Amendment issues. So it would behoove you to have a First Amendment lawyer in your state and an independent legal counsel that you can go to with questions. Maybe when you need a second opinion, maybe you are not confident that your county or city attorney knows the issue as well as you need them to. Or maybe you are working, you know, at cross purposes with your city council. Maybe your city council is unhappy with you, and your city attorney is going to have a better relationship with them, and they're going to have a much easier time talking to them than they are talking to you. So make sure you have someone in your corner. You can ask them to consult on like 1 hour of policy revision, and then you are their clients and you get to ask them questions when you really need them. Your state ACLU is also going to be helpful. I know our state ACLU right now is working really heavily on reproductive issues. They're not working so hard on the First Amendment stuff right now, but I know that if I needed them, they would be there. Next slide. A few other things that we think you might consider. This might not surprise you. I wouldn't put your reconsideration form on your website. I would require that they talk to a staff member, that maybe they even talk to a manager or director first before they get the reconsideration form. It's just so easy to print off a form anonymously, you know, in the dark at your house at night, fill it out, throw it in an envelope and put it in the mail without ever actually having to engage with your library staff. Again, reminder, I would recommend changing the conversation to a statement of concern for all the reasons that I mentioned before. Adopt your ALA statements as guiding documents and use them as a framework as you're creating your policies. So I'm talking about, you know, your professional ethics, your freedom to read statement, freedom to view statement, things like that. If you can convince your board to place some of these limits on challenges, and I think it might be hard when you don't have a challenge looming, but it's so much better to have these things in policy ahead of time. And I think that finding articles and examples in your state or just across the nation that show that, you know, when challenges come, often they come, you know, in a huge deluge, and you want to be prepared in advance for that. And if you can, with some of the handy tips and tricks that we've taught you in this webinar, convince your board, try and get those requirements or limits on challenges into your policy. Also, get to know your local librarians, whether they're at neighboring public libraries, whether they're working in your colleges or community colleges or your school libraries. Having other professionals that you can, even if you don't get them on your reconsideration committee, if you don't get that as part of your policy, having them in your corner, having them able to be out there, you know, talking to their friends and talking in the community on your behalf, even unofficially. It's always better to have more friends, right? All right, next slide. So I always struggle at webinars with, okay, that's great. And now the webinar is done, and then I turn and I get back to my inbox and I don't do anything with it. So we made a handy little to-do list for you. So I would recommend that in the next week, you find a First Amendment attorney. You don't even have to have them consult for you, but contact your ACLU, contact your state bar association, maybe even your state library, and find a First Amendment attorney and just put their email address in your email inbox. Because when you need them, that is not the time to go looking for it because it's just too much work. It's better to be prepared. Ounce of prevention, right? Also, send some intellectual freedom training resources to your trustees. I think library workers are often very steeped in what is going on nationally. Trustees less so. They know what we tell them generally. So Freedom to Read Foundation and ALA, I believe, are putting on this Prepared for Pride Month webinar that's coming up in 7 short days. So send them a link to this, and it is something off of your to-do list and gets you towards your accreditation. At least in the state of Iowa, you have to do trustee training for accreditation. So kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Look up some other policies, see how yours measures up. Maybe collect them, see what you like, see what you don't like, but start finding those libraries whose policy you trust and you find matches your own or your library board's appetite for how prescriptive, how wordy, how, you know, policy-like your policies need to be. And last but not least, this is also probably the one that I am the worst at, contact your elected officials. One thing I'm trying to get off the ground here in Iowa, and maybe you all can do this in your state too, I'm hoping that we hold regional meet and greets with our librarians and their elected officials. So often we email with, oh no, please don't pass this bill during legislative session. But what we need them to see is the great work that you're doing every day. So if you can get on their mailing lists, see if you can add them to your mailing lists too. You send out programs, you send out new books, you send out, you know, exciting community news. Show them what a valuable resource the library is to your community. Also, let them see your face, let them know who you are. Ask them questions and let them know that they can ask you questions too. You want to be the person that they're listening to about library issues. Next slide. That concludes our presentation. We're going to make 2 really quick plugs. One is for the Merit Fund. So the Libre C Merit Humanitarian Fund is an excellent fund, and it provides financial support to librarians who are denied employment rights because of discrimination or because as kind of like I've lost the word, but if they are, struggling in their career or their job or lose their job because they've put their neck out for intellectual freedom, sometimes it is paying attorney's fees. Sometimes it is paying their mortgage. So if you have some money to spare, throw it at the merit fund. They could use it. I know when we did this presentation or a similar presentation in January, there had been 9 requests in the year, and there wasn't enough money in the fund to pay all those people the money that they were requesting. So do your part, send some money to the merit fund, and I'll let Sukrit talk about the next one.
Thank you. And so if you are a member of the Freedom to Read Foundation, thank you. If you're not yet a member of Freedom to Read Foundation, please look into becoming one. And the purpose of Freedom to Read Foundation is to promote and protect freedom of speech, safeguarding libraries' rights to provide all materials stored in the nation's libraries, also supporting libraries and librarians in their defense of First Amendment rights by supplying them with legal counsel or the means to secure it. So please join Freedom to Read Foundation today by going to ftrf.org. And with this, we conclude our presentation today, and we will be more than happy to take some questions. And this is our contact information. Thank you all.
And full disclosure, librarian that I am, I already did a little bit of side Googling to answer some of our Q&As really quickly. Found some resources. So there was a question about whether it's necessary to make the names of those who are on an official book challenge or committee public. And there is a, I'm going to type an answer and add a link to an OIF blog post about this specifically. And there was a case last year, in October of 2022 is when this was written. Someone ruled that the request for reconsideration form must be disclosed when requested, but with the requester names and other identifying information redacted. So I would say that current legal precedent is that no, you do not need to make their names public, and you probably should not if there is an open records request for that. As always, every single time you get a public records request, run it past your city or county attorney or someone who, can cover your butt legally. But that is my answer for whether to publicize their name. I would say no, at least for now. There's probably going to be an appeal, and we'll see where it lands in a few years.
And I'll echo Amanda. So we had the same thing when people objected to our book challenge for genderqueer. They wanted to know the committee member's name. And I said, committee only recommends. I, as the director, signs it. So you know my information. So we did not give away any of our committee members' names.
That too. I know I've had a lot of questions about, do I have to, especially in school libraries where often there are students on the reconsideration committee. Sometimes they will keep just the students' names private from the reconsideration committee, but again, you should check with your city or county attorney, because if these are people who are like acting in the interests of a city department on a reconsideration committee, it might be that because they're really doing city or county or public government business, that their information should be made public. There was a question about what constitutes a challenge versus a complaint, and I don't know that I have found exactly, oh shoot, sorry, I clicked the wrong button. I'm not entirely sure that this is the page that I'm looking for, but OIF blog again does have a what is a challenge article. I would say that, if people are just complaining or saying whatever, and making statements, that is not a challenge. A challenge is like an official attempt to remove a restricted item. So at the point where they fill out a form, that is when it becomes a challenge. A library that I helped, they approached me when a community member sent a letter to the mayor, and the mayor passed it on to the library board. I was like, they're not following your process. There's nothing for your board to act on. They're just talking to your mayor. Like, they're not following your procedure. It is not a challenge. You don't have to do anything. You don't even really have to respond to it, because they didn't send this letter to you or your board. They sent it to the mayor. He sent it to you for informational purposes, but that's not that. I would say does not rise to the level of a challenge. It should still be addressed, and you can still talk to your board, but I wouldn't officially list it as a challenge, technically. I would recommend that you post your policy. I would recommend that you post your policies on your website. I wouldn't post your procedures. And I know often libraries have huge numbers of policies, and I'm not even sure that I have every policy of ours on the website. But I do think it's best practice because people should be able to know and see how their library is run and what rules they agree to follow when they sign up for a card.
Amanda, I know you are on a roll, but I'm going to jump in quickly since we are at the official end of time. And I want to say thank you so much to our presenters for sharing your knowledge and insight on these important topics of preparing for program challenges. Thank you to my Public Programs Office colleagues helping today with tech and answering questions behind the scenes. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. As it's been said in the chat, the recording of this presentation will be shared with all attendees in the next 48 hours and posted to the event page on programminglibrarian.org. I know there's a lot been going on in the chat that's also been excellent. That is going to be anonymized, and that like the chat transcript is going to be uploaded as well. So you'll have all those helpful links that your colleagues have posted. If you have any questions, you can contact us at publicprograms@ala.org. Thank you all so much. And I know we still have people here. I don't know, Amanda, if you had more questions, but for our official recording, I wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to continue answering Q&A questions as well. Caroline has a really good question. How do you write the policy in a way that the staff member that created the program is not on file during the challenge process? And I'm not sure that I have a really great answer for that. I think that it maybe goes hand in hand with Sukrit's suggestion that you have a single spokesperson. Like I would say maybe your board president and your director can be your two spokespeople. Or if you have a large enough organization, you know, the director, you can add in maybe a manager or a department head, and they can all work together. And I know that that doesn't work so well in smaller libraries. I think that when you encounter these issues, often it's happening at board meetings, and you can have code of conduct at your board meetings. You can, say, we are not discussing this, and this kind of goes hand in hand with a question about, what about queer librarians who are just trying to do their jobs? Like, we're going to talk about this resource and how it relates to our policy. This person's identity, who this person is, how you think they are doing their job, that is not relevant to this conversation. And we will not entertain attacks. We will not entertain off-topic things. And you need to have a board president who will take the reins of that conversation and cut people off if they are straying from what is acceptable behavior in your public comment sections. And I understand that there's a whole universe of issues that that does not cover. But I think making sure that your board president knows how to run a meeting is extremely important. And your state likely has a public information board that can be helpful in telling them what they are and are not allowed to do. And I am always referring people to their public information board because often these public meetings, people aren't professional board members generally. They don't often, in their day-to-day life, work with Robert's rules and things like that. And they might just not know what they can do, and they don't want to do something wrong. And so then they don't always engage in all of the actions that they are entitled to in order to protect your staff and to protect your library. There was a question about those complaints. I think, and having it passed up the ladder in a large organization, I think you can have stacks of your business cards at your service desks, or hey, I'm gonna email you. I'm envisioning a programmer out at a program. It's you know what? I'm not the person that you should be talking to about that. Can I get your email address? I'm going to email you, and I'm going to CC the person who you really should be having this conversation with. So you're engaging with them and like respecting the fact that they are bringing this concern to you and connecting them to that person. And so the procedure for that is going to differ from library to library, and you'll have to just decide how you want to do that. But I would recommend, moving it to a department head or directly to your director, and you'll just, like I said, you'll need to define that in your library. In my library, all of those come to me, but I have about 12 other staff members, and we don't really have department heads. So it'll just kind of depend, but your frontline staff need to know who to refer those to and how that procedure should work. Sukrit made a really great point talking about how you should be doing annual training. And part of that should just be like, okay, someone comes up and is like, says this thing, what do you do? They should be well equipped so that they're not scrambling and it doesn't create any additional stress for them. Speak to the trend of outside of library entities having events at the library. They're viewed as library programs. I don't know that I can speak to that. Sukrit, you look like you might be able to.
Yeah, I think that's basically the meeting room policy. So if we are checking out our meeting rooms to outside organizations, we are not going to be, again, like telling them what kind of programs they can do. As long as it's not a hate program, we are not going to be censoring it. And I remember we talked about like Seattle Public Library in the past, went through all this, where they hosted or they rented out a meeting room to a group which a lot of people were very offended with. But again, their policy allowed them to check out their meeting room to any group who wants it. And they can't discriminate.
And I don't remember the specifics of the Kirk Cameron one specifically.
Right.
I feel like the request that they were making was to be like a speaker at a library program. Excuse me. And yeah, that's really different. And you can say, no, we don't allow non-professionals or non-staff members, or if you have a program policy, these are the community groups that we allow to partner with us in our programs. So you can insulate yourself from those requests and say, this isn't something that we allow under our policy, but as Sukrit said, you're more than welcome to come and promote your own thing in our library meeting room. In which case, I would also suggest that you have a strong policy about how events that happen at the library are advertised, right. And how they can use your name on their promotional materials. So that, you could, if somebody's like, Dubuque County Library sponsors whatever, and it's like, no, you're using our meeting room, I would have in my policy that I reserve the right to cancel their reservation if they are misrepresenting the relationship between the library. Put that kind of stuff in your policy. Hand yourself, stock yourself with the ammunition that you need to, protect the interests of your library and your staff and your community. So.
Excellent. That was a whirlwind of information. Thank you both so much. Thank you so much for staying on a little extra to answer all these questions. I see we still have like almost 200 people, so everyone was interested to get the answers to those questions, me included. Again, the recording will be posted shortly, and thank you again so much to Sukrit and Amanda. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.